All right, so again, the positive symptoms of schizophrenia, it means an excess of or additions to normal behavior. So more of a behavior than what you would commonly see, or extra behaviors that you wouldn't normally see in an average person. All right, so delusions are a positive symptom of schizophrenia. Delusions are unshakable false beliefs. So you very much believe something to be true that is not true. Some people can have just a delusional disorder where pretty much all they have is delusions. That would fall under a psychotic disorder, but not maybe full schizophrenia. So people that who are schizophrenic with their delusions, a lot of times they will think that the government has planted something in their brain or is following them, that there are aliens tracking them. Sometimes they'll have what's called delusions of grandeur, where they believe that they are someone very big or famous, like they think they're the King of England, or Jesus is a one that a lot of them think are a god of some sort. They very much though believe these delusions to be true. So in the movie, Russell Crowe had these delusions that the government was asking him to find codes, and he had to use his mathematical brain to break these codes that were in all of these newspapers and magazines that were being sent from the enemy, right? And it was this unshakable false belief that he absolutely was being told to do this by the government, and he had to do this, right? It was a delusion for him. The other positive symptom of schizophrenia are hallucinations. So hallucinations are when you see or hear things that don't exist. You can actually hallucinate any of your senses, but most commonly are visual and auditory hallucinations. And that's what most people that have hallucinations as part of their schizophrenia is what they experience. They see things that aren't there, they hear things that aren't there. Some people hallucinate people, right? They see people and talk to people that aren't there. Some hallucinate animals, some hallucinate voices in their head, people talking to them in their head. Some people hallucinate, demons, you name it, they can hallucinate it. An interesting thing, though, about the hallucinations is that they do have a kind of a cultural aspect to them. And I think I talked about this in class before, but with schizophrenia, what we found is that people from different cultures will hallucinate different things. So people who have hallucinations in America, the United States, tend to hallucinate more kind of bad things, like demons and bad stuff. People in more kind of developing countries, people who live in like tribal type communities, will hallucinate more kind of positive things. And sometimes think of, maybe that they're seeing their like spirit animal or talking to one of their like ancestors, and it's actually seen as a very positive thing, which is just very interesting for how kind of we view it and how our brain manifests hallucinations when they happen. So with, in the movie, Russell Crowe would hallucinate people. He would see his college roommate who never really existed, a little girl who never existed, and this guy from the government that never existed, and he would talk to them and fully believe that these people existed in the world. And the people, his wife, thought they did too, because he would talk about them as like, oh, my college roommate, and oh, I just saw him the other day, and his wife was like, oh, we should have him over for dinner, not knowing that he didn't exist, he wasn't a real person. So the delusions and the hallucinations are both, like we said, those positive symptoms. We're adding something in. Now, the positive symptoms of schizophrenia are the only symptoms that we can actually help with medication. So we do have antipsychotic medications that can stop the hallucinations, stop the delusions for most people. Now, depending on how severe your schizophrenia is, the more of the psychotic medications we may need to give you. What most people complain about with the antipsychotic drugs is that it just kind of dulls everything. Like, it's hard to feel anything when they're on it, which, people with severe schizophrenia who are trying to, live these, happy, normal, productive lives and have to be on these large levels of antipsychotic drugs just feel like they're pretty much just walking around dead inside. It's really hard for them to stay on their medication because it takes everything away from them. People who don't have that severe of schizophrenia can, take their medication every day and be, totally okay, and, have, their jobs and their lives and their families and with no problem. Schizophrenia is not a rare disorder. About 1 in every 100 people has some form of schizophrenia. So if you know more than 100 people, then you know someone with schizophrenia, or you will know someone with schizophrenia. And you may not know that they have it because it's not their job to tell you. But it's a very common disorder. Delusions and hallucinations are those things that we tend to hear about. Now, when someone is found, not guilty due to mental defect, when they have, gone to court, a lot of times it's because they have been having a psychotic episode, which may mean they have schizophrenia. It may mean they have different types of psychotic disorders. And they're found not guilty due to mental defect because they were in a state of psychosis where reality was not part of their world anymore. And they had no idea what they were actually doing while they were doing it. So, do people with schizophrenia sometimes, commit crimes and do bad things? Yes. But more people without schizophrenia do harmful crimes than people with schizophrenia. We shouldn't say that, those schizophrenic people are the ones who, are bad, or so people with mental illness are the ones that are doing all these bad things. That's completely not true. You're more likely to have a violent offense committed against you by someone who isn't mentally ill than someone who is. But yes, there are people who have, committed crimes due to them being in a psychotic state. I had my best friend, who's a forensic psychologist, had a 18 or 19-year-old kid who went into a psychotic break, and he believed that his whole family were actually demons, and that they had been sent to kill everyone on Earth for the devil, and that the only person that wasn't a demon in his family was his little sister, who was like 7 years old. And he went throughout his house and he murdered every single member of his family because he was like, well, they're demons, I have to kill them so that I can save the world. And he pretty much just had his sister by the hand the whole time while he did it all, and so they were both completely covered in blood, and then he took her to Six Flags to celebrate that he had saved the world, because he had, in his mind, that is what had happened. That is someone who's under a psychotic break, right? And then when we get them into the state mental facility and we get them medicated and we get them, then they have to deal with the fact that, oh my God, I just killed my whole family, and it's a really kind of horrible and sad thing. This is also what happens when moms drown their babies in the bathtub because they're having a postpartum psychosis, where they're then in a psychotic state as well, and are usually put into a state mental facility for that as well. All of those fall under psychotic disorders, including schizophrenia, and may include positive symptoms such as delusions and hallucinations. All right, so then we have the other side of schizophrenia, which are the negative symptoms, which we don't hear about nearly as much as the other type. So negative symptoms are when there's less than or an absence of normal behavior. So we're going to be taking away from normal/average behavior. So different types of negative symptoms for schizophrenia are things like poor attention, not being able to really focus, having that flat affect that I talked about, where you don't show any emotion at all. Sometimes you can also show inappropriate emotion. So when there's something sad's happening, you're laughing, or when something's funny, you start crying uncontrollably. Sometimes they have poor speech production. They can have what's called word salad, where they're talking but the wrong words are coming out, or they'll kind of start and stop sentences over and over again and not kind of be able to talk in a nice flowing way. These are all actual symptoms of schizophrenia. Now, are there other disorders that can cause these things? Absolutely. But one part of schizophrenia with these negative symptoms are these things. All right. So the next thing we're going to talk about is dissociative identity disorder, or DID, also called multiple personality disorder. So I talked about this a little bit when we did our personality theory with Freud, and I talked about our defense mechanisms with dissociation and things like that. And that's what's going to happen with multiple personalities. So dissociative identity disorder is a dissociative disorder. So we have lots of different dissociative disorders. This is another umbrella of mental health issues called dissociative disorders. And a dissociative disorder is when your brain kind of checks out from reality and just kind of goes away. Like your mind is like, yeah, I can't be here anymore, bye, and kind of leaves you with an empty shell. So dissociation usually occurs due to trauma, when something's so traumatic that happens that your brain's like, we cannot deal with this, like, we're out, and you're just kind of left blankly staring with kind of nothing behind your eyes. You've probably seen this in movies and TV, right? When someone has experienced something traumatic and they're kind of waving their hand in front of the person's face and nothing's there, they're not responding back. That's a dissociation. It's not uncommon to dissociate under a traumatic event, but there are people that will dissociate like multiple times a day or a week, and it's usually in response to previous trauma that's being triggered by other things. With multiple personalities, what's happening with dissociative identity disorder is that when you're triggered by a trauma or something else triggers a remembering of a trauma, your main personality dissociates and a new personality comes out. So multiple personalities are almost always caused by severe child sexual and physical abuse. There's pretty much no other way that this happens, and it only can happen in childhood. By the time you're an adult, your personality is too far formed for it to split. It has to happen pretty early on in life. So during the abuse as a child, now pretty much any child who is severely sexually or physically abused will dissociate, because the child's brain is saying, what's happening to us is too awful, we can't be here anymore, and they'll just kind of leave and kind of go, people say, I'm going to go to my happy place. I'm like, that's pretty much what's happening. I'm just going to dissociate away from this pain and this trauma and this awfulness of my life and just kind of check out. I'm not here. So people who have dissociated to childhood trauma a lot of times won't even remember their childhood trauma, because their brain didn't even process the memory of it. So with multiple personalities, what happens is that for a very small segment of these children who dissociate during the trauma, instead of just dissociating, what their brain does is it forms a new personality to deal with the abuse. So a new personality gets formed, and that personality comes out when the abuse starts to occur. Now, the longer that the abuse happens and the more abusers that the child faces, the more personalities can be formed. So there are people that have, 30, 40, 50 or more personalities that all live inside their brain, all live in their frontal lobe, that come out and kind of, when they're under stress. It is a difficult disorder to treat. Part of it is you have to kind of figure out what was going on in the childhood, and all of the different personalities have different memories because different ones came out when different things were happening. A lot of times the kind of core main personality doesn't know a lot of what happened because the other personalities won't let them know what happened. It's really, really interesting. The personalities can be male or female. A female with, DID can have male personalities and female personalities. They can be, some of your personalities might be, bisexual. Some may, be more extroverted while there's more introverted. They can be different ages, all over the place. And their entire being changes when the new personality comes out. The way they hold themselves, the way they talk, the way everything about them changes. It's like a whole different person is standing in front of you. Their facial expressions, everything. There's a different person standing in front of you when they, kind of switch over to the other personalities. So when you do therapy with someone with multiple personalities, you have to kind of do therapy with all of the personalities and kind of get them to agree to come out and talk to you. And the goal of treatment is to combine back down into a single personality and say, okay, it's not helpful to this person anymore for you to be coming out all the time. So we need to get you to agree to go away so that we can have just one kind of core personality. And a lot of times the other personalities won't agree to that, and so that makes it difficult. People may not know they have multiple personalities. They just know that there's something not right and that they have a lot of missing time during their day or during their week that they can't account for. Because what happens is when the other personality takes over, you kind of go blank. And so you might be sitting, at the grocery store, standing in line at the grocery store, and the next thing you know, you're, waking up in bed and you have no idea how you got there. And you're just like, okay, like what's going on here? It's scary, and you don't know, and you have all these blackouts. Now, because this comes from people who've usually had a lot of trauma, along with childhood trauma usually comes drug use and alcoholism and other things, so it may all be tied together, and they'd think like, oh, maybe it's because I did all those drugs, or I drank so much last night, or whatever, and not really realize that what's actually happening is another personality is taking over and kind of running the body for a while. So treatment really needs to be pretty intensive. Usually it's going to a in treatment type place to have intensive weeks long or months long therapy to try and get the personalities back down to one personality. Even then, even when we are able to kind of integrate Deck down into a single personality, if a really stressful or traumatic event happens again, the other personalities will pop back out like a jack in the box. Like, we're back. We're here to deal with the stress again. Because that's what their job was. They were made to deal with the trauma. So whenever stress or trauma prop up, they come out again and say, well, this is our job, right? We were made to deal with this. So that's why it's a pretty difficult one to treat, but it is quite rare. I mean, you wouldn't think it, being that all the movies and shows that show it, which most of them are not very good at showing this at all. But it is quite a rare disorder, but it is quite difficult to treat.